I cannot hear anything.
Just wait a minute, please.
Okay.
Okay. A warm Doha greeting to everyone from the Iranian Studies Unit of the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. My name is Mehran Kamrava. After 4 years of relentless maximum pressure by the Trump administration, relations between Iran and the United States are about to take yet another turn. Whether or not that turn is for the better or for the worse remains to be seen in the coming years, and specifically in the coming months and weeks. We know that Iran has been trying to recalibrate its foreign and security policies in relation to the United States, but also in relation to the European Union and also the countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council. To help us guide through this recalibration of Iranian foreign and security policy, there is no one better to walk us through this than Professor Nasser Hadian, who is Professor of Political Science at the University of Tehran. Professor Hadian is someone whom I have known for a number of decades and whose writings and insights I and others like me have used extensively and have relied on a great deal. Without further ado, let me introduce Professor Nasser Hadian, who will talk us through Iranian foreign and security policies in the post-Trump era. Professor Hadian, the floor is yours. Go ahead, please, Professor Hadian.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? Mehran, can you hear me?
Nasser, go ahead, please.
Yes?
Yes,
yes, I can hear you now.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, regarding the post-Trump era and our perception and hopefully our future policy, foreign policy and security policies, I have to mention that, I guess, first of all, we think that President-elect Biden is going to go full force for multilateralism and paying more attention to diplomacy, and it has basically it's positive and it's negative for us. The positive part of it would be, he's a rational individual. If there is a pressure, the pressure is not going to be for the sake of the pressure. Rather, it's going to is an instrument for achieving something. So in other words, he's a rational player and he knows the cost and benefit of what he does. And I guess that would be in generally perceived positively. But the negative point is he can apply pressure effectively because he's a consensus maker individual. He would make coalition with the other partners, and thus the pressure would be far greater and more effective. So that's one point which we have in our mind. We are not naive to think that, okay, it is coming, everything is going to be okay. Because he has the international legitimacy, unlike President Trump, so he can make a coalition and he can apply pressure far more effectively. Number two, he's going to basically pay attention to international liberal order, liberal democratic order. And again, he's going to basically lead. In other words, he's not going to be President Trump. He's going to lead the so-called free world, and trying to strengthen the liberal democratic order. So it has, again, its positive and its negative for us. Basically, what it does. Global issues are going to be paid more attention, like climate change, like healthcare, so forth and so on. Next point which I would like to bring is basically he's going to use the sanctions. In other words, sanctions still is going to be an important tool in American foreign policy toolbox. So again, we are not going to think that, okay, he's going to put aside that important and significant tool in the toolbox. To be a little bit more concrete now, China, again, it's going to be, China is extremely important, which I would go to it a little bit later, because our relation with China and also with US are extremely important. But I would go to it in a few minutes from now. But China is arising, the perception in the American establishment, bipartisan establishment or deep state, is that China is a rising power and Russia is a declining power. Thus, basically, they are going to try to contain China, not to be hegemon in the East Asia. In order to achieve that, they are going to do offshore balancing. They have been doing offshore balancing in 3 parts of the world. Basically, balancing Russia with the NATO, balancing Iran with the GCC, plus the willing countries, and balancing China with the coalition of India, Australia, South Korea, and Japan, plus some smaller countries. And America itself, particularly by its Navy, to be the balancer. So it has a lot of implication for us, which I would address it a little bit later. Regarding Russia, Russia is going to be very important for Biden administration, but still they know Russia is a declining power. Although they cannot ignore or dismiss it, but certainly the main resources are going to be allocated to containing China. So the Pacific pivot basically means that. Europe, certainly Biden tried to get closer to Europe and basically make a partnership again as before with the Europe in order to address a number of global issues, including Iranian nuclear issue and other issues related to Iran, which I would go to it a little bit later. But let me go now to the issues which is far more significant for us and related to us. Number one issue is JCPOA. I guess he is very quickly, he has to deal with it. He just cannot postpone it or delay addressing the issue of Iran. So far, he has been said that he's going to join the JCPOA very soon. And what I can understand from him and the people around him is that it's going to be unconditional. If we look at the interview he had with Tom Friedman of New York Times, he said that although Tom Friedman argued that why not using the leverages which have been created by President Trump, he answered, first, we have to go to the JCPOA. If Iran would go to the JCPOA for full compliance, we would go for full compliance. That indicated to me that he is really clever and is very knowledgeable about the issue. Because when President Trump was able to withdraw from the JCPOA, he never faced the bad choices which President Obama faced. President Obama faced with 2 bad choices. One was they perceived Iran is making a bomb. And number 2 is, in order to stop Iranian bomb, they have to wage a war. Neither of those options were attractive to him, because a bomb would have changed the strategic calculus of all major regional and international players. And a war would have had a number of known and unknown consequences, like increasing of terrorism, refugees, destabilization of the region, so forth and so on. So he didn't want either of them, thus we had the JCPOA. And he rightly calculated, if he wanted to bring other issues, like the missile issues, like the regional issues, then that negotiation would have taken decades. And Iran, and the ticking of the clock was in our interest and not in the interest of United States or West in general, because there were two time ticking. One was sanctions, and they concluded that with sanction is not going to be as effective. Thus, Iran is going to move toward the bomb, and they can make the bomb. Thus, we are better off to stop it there and to deal with the nuclear issue. So that was the reason that they didn't go to the other issue. It didn't mean that they don't want to deal with the other issues, but they were rightly calculated. They're better off to do it. But President Trump never faced those choices. Because when he took office and when he withdrew from JCPOA, Iran had already been monitored, inspected repeatedly, and many of its strategic capitals would have been taken away from it. We have more than 12,000 kilograms of enriched uranium. We had more than 18,000 centrifuges, and they were all taken away. And nothing was being enriched in the Fordow, which is strategically extremely important. That's a site in Natanz, close to Tehran. So that's why President Trump could easily withdraw with not paying that cost. But there was another reason too. In Iran, there was a debate. Should we withdraw as a withdraw? Because we had the right to withdraw. Even under the JCPOA 36, Article 26 and 36. So we had the option to withdraw. But the European then convinced us. No, the hardliners would argue, deceived us. They said that we are going to compensate. Don't withdraw from the JCPOA. And they played with us for about 2 years. I'm sorry to say that it is increasingly the perception in Iran that the European played with us to keep us basically in the JCPOA. But now, just last week, Iranian Majlis passed a law forcing the government to take a number of measures which would create the same capability and same capacity rather much faster than before, which I would go to it a little bit later. So now, once we began to increase our capacity, our nuclear capacity, so President Biden again is facing two choices. We concluded in Iran that unless, that's more than a year now, that unless we build the same capacity, we just cannot trust the West. We cannot trust European or Americans, that they're going to go back to the JCPOA out of the goodwill or whatever. And you see that even there are groups close to President-elect Biden now, and also the Republicans are calling, why not using the leverages which have been created by President Biden, like the sanctions. So that further convinced us in Iran that we have to go to increase our capacity. So that's why we had the Majlis law, although we had begun much earlier. But what stopped us about a year ago, or several months ago, 8-9 months ago, was basically to a large extent Russia, then China, and then European convinced us, wait. So we increased a little bit our capacity. We have 10 times, of course, now more than enriched uranium than we are allowed under the JCPOA. And that's good enough for 1 or 2 bombs, potentially. But what Majlis passed last week would help us, would force us to increase or enrich uranium even at 20% much faster than before. So that's why we try to again deal with that taking of the time. Because if it is not there, President Biden would say to himself, why not wait? Iranians are under pressure, sanctions are biting, thus they are going to come back in the negotiation table, and this time we can get far more. But he has both the experience and the knowledge that same thing can happen which happened in 2003. At that time, we had less than 200 centrifuges. But when we negotiated and when we agreed the JCPOA on 2015, or we began to implement it, Iran had more than 18,000 centrifuges, and we had more than 12,000 kilograms of enriched uranium and a lot of advancement in our centrifuges. So President Biden is well informed that if he doesn't do it now, in the first 100 days of his presidency, the next time they are going to talk with Iran, they're going to negotiate with Iran, there is a good possibility either we are in a state of what I have called constructive ambiguity, or you have the bomb. So that's why he doesn't have a choice, to be frank with you. He doesn't have a choice of not coming back to the JCPOA unconditionally. In fact, even President Trump, if he was in the power, still that would have been the case even with him. And that would have been, to be frank with you, much easier for us in regard to, because again, I will tell you what happened basically. You see that once he's facing real choices, he see that, okay, these choices are not attractive. So we concluded in Iran several months ago, we have to credibilize 2 important threats, bomb and war. So by gradually reducing our commitment under the JCPOA, we send the message that, okay, this idea of making bomb may be alive again. And particularly, if they do anything, in other words, if they take our file to the UN Security Council, they have received the message that Iran not only is going to withdraw from the JCPOA, but rather is going to withdraw from the NPT. So no monitors, no inspections, no camera, nothing. Then they have to guess what we are doing. And that's what I call constructive ambiguity. Because Israelis would call the program strategic ambiguity. I would call it constructive ambiguity because I think that would be helpful for the peace. That would be helpful for returning to the JCPOA. So, but the reason that we stopped was the 2 which I told you, Russians, Chinese, and also, of course, the pandemic. Coronavirus was important too for our stuff. But we are going to begin very quickly. President Biden, I guess, has about 10 days, 12 days to decide, to send a message that he's going to go back to the JCPOA unconditionally. So because he has to face with 2 credible threats. One was the threat of bomb, which we have by reducing our commitment. We have indicated that, okay, you have to guess now, and yes, we will go all the way to increase all of our capabilities. And number 2, credibilizing the war, that we are ready for the war. What Iran did in the Persian Gulf, basically with the ships, in Dubai ports, in Aramco, bringing down a US Global Hawk drone, And they indicated Iran is ready for the war. CENTCOM is there, US forces, they are all there, and still Iranian took those actions. What they did was killing of General Soleimani, which was extremely important because the deterrence, US deterrence, had been to a large extent eroded. Right after what happened in Aramco, we received a number of messages from a number of these countries, Persian Gulf countries. They thought that, yes, it is not going to be a war between Iran and the United States. They're going to pay a cost too. Because before that, they thought it's going to be cakewalk and Americans are going to destroy Iran or attack Iran and nothing is going to happen. But they took the message, no, it's going to be a regional war and everyone is going to pay. Yes, Iranian will pay a heavy cost, but the others are going to pay too. So that's why they decided to restore their deterrence by killing General Soleimani. Of course, that was strategically very important. Militarily, not that much, but strategically, that was a very important decision to killing the General Soleimani. But Iran, by firing the missiles, in fact, it was enough strategically for us to fire one missile in order to restore our deterrence. Because America have threatened us, they are going to basically attack more than 54 even cultural sites. After all those threats, Iran is still dared to fire 22 missiles to two important sites in Iraq. So that showed, and to me, that proved our deterrence again. So to me, both Iran and United States have restored their deterrence. This is at the strategic level. At the military level, so it was, I'm not a military expert, but it's a question mark in my mind, why Americans could not detect any of the missiles and could not destroy them. So that's an important military question. That's why they couldn't do that. Not even once, they could not detect even one single of those missiles. So if no one was killed or whatever is irrelevant to the question, to a strategic question. It was enough to show our will of standing against America. But militarily, as I mentioned, militarily, what we did to me is significant. And what the American did, basically it was known, Qasem Soleimani himself never thought that he's going to be attacked because Americans had the chance before many times to kill him, to assassinate him. But that was his understanding, that the Americans do not want to kill him. So that's why he was not all that much careful about his traveling. That's militarily important, but not very important. And politically, I guess both countries were not successful. We couldn't sell that was a hard revenge. They couldn't sell that Qasem Soleimani was a terrorist. So we were not successful at the political level, neither of us. So, but what, as a result of these things, we have credibilized that we are ready for the war. We don't want a war, but if it happens, we are ready for it. And we are not scared of the war. So that's why we have been able to credibilize both of those threats. Thus, the chances of President Biden to go back to the JCPOA is extremely high to me. No matter how much pressure from Riyadh, from Abu Dhabi, from Tel Aviv, or in Washington, they are all a spoiler. They would try their best to stop him. But there are spoilers in Iran too, which have both importance here and there. In Iran also, there are basically, I can say there are three major groups in Iran who are dealing with this issue. Two of them would have preferred President Trump or would not like any deal with the United States, any return of JCPOA right now. One group of these principalists think and look at the issue through ideological lens. To them, we never can trust America. America is aggressor. America is wolf, and a wolf cannot change its nature. And that would be stupid of us to think that, that nature can be changed. Thus, their mistrust of American is very much rooted in their ideological orientation. That's one group. So thus they don't want a return to the JCPOA because they don't trust them. The other group of principalists, they oppose it pragmatically, not ideologically. Pragmatically means they want to do it themselves. They think if current condition continues, in the next June election, they are going to get the presidency. People are not happy now. They are under pressure. They are frustrated. They did not participate in previous Majlis election. And with 42%, they could get the control of the Majlis. And if same thing happened, they don't look to increase the level of participation. Because as soon as the level of participation goes beyond 50%, then the chances of reformists and moderate forces winning are extremely high. If it is 60%, that's almost guaranteed that the reformists are going to win, and the moderate as well. Thus, the second group of the principalists are a pragmatic.
I think we appear to have lost our connection with Professor Hadian. In the meanwhile, while we try to reestablish the connection, allow me to say a couple of things. I think Professor Hadian has observed that Iran is at least trying to force the hand of the Biden administration to return to the negotiations. And it has done this through steady ramping up of its capabilities. And in this sense, Iran has, in his estimation, successfully forced Biden's hand. There appears to be a consensus emerging in Tehran that a return to the JCPOA is in Iran's best interest. And there are, of course, spoilers. One of those spoilers is the principalists active in the Majlis. Welcome back, Professor Hadian.
Can you hear me?
Summarize some of the important points you had made, but I'll turn it over to you now.
Kamran, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Hello?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, okay. Sorry for the interruption. So I would go back to my discussion. Then the argument of the moderate and reformist are spoilers are going to destroy the JCPOA. And that would be an illusion to think that it would, the next year we can do it. Either we will do it right away or there is no chance for it. And also we know that if it happens now, this is implicit in the argument, that the reformists and the moderates have a good chance of winning the election next year, next June. Because as soon as it happens, it has a great impact, at least psychologically inside Iran, if not in real term. Of course, in real term, it has an impact too, but mostly that would be psychologically. Psychologically, people would think that, okay, we are in the right direction. Then why we have to change? Why we have to vote for a principalist, which we don't know what would happen? So we can trust someone like Zarif far more to deliver. That's number two. Number three is infrastructure of knowledge exists between the current team and the Biden team. They all know one another. Zarif knows Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, Arakchi, Ravanchi. The team here knows almost everyone from the team over there. So that trust has already been built there, and the knowledge is already there. Thus, they think it is much better to do it now. So that's why basically a return to the JCPOA has this impact here too. But I would like to address a couple of other issues which I think are completely related but very important. We had a debate here inside Iran about a year ago between three groups of elite, relevant elite in the policy circles about our relationship with China, Russia, Europe, and US, all the great powers. Basically, government and foreign ministry were very much pro the Europe, and portion of the military forces and social classes support the China and Russia. But that debate is over. Basically, there is a consensus now that we have to get close to China. That proposal of 25 years plan was a signal to China, because Chinese were nagging that, what happened when right after the JCPOA, you forgot us, you dismissed us, and you basically fall in love again with the West and went to the bed with the West rather than us. They were reluctant to open up. So this time, basically, to a large extent, Supreme Leader appointed, and Rouhani also, Ali Larijani, in order to show that, okay, no matter what happened this time, our relationship with China is going to remain there. And we are going to have a closer relationship there too. Since we concluded China is a rising power in the future, thus we thought Russians also are going to get closer to China as well, particularly in a Biden administration. Thus, within the elite, I can say there is almost a consensus now that we have to get close to China. But the point is, to what extent? Then we have two groups here. One group would argue that we have to go to the orbit of China, but they would look at the issue very much from a strategic lens. They think that America is going to do offshore balancing with China. China cannot use the delaying tactic any longer. They want to delay the fights with the Americans as much as possible. But they think it is not possible anymore. Or the perception is it is only another 3-4 years or 5 years which they can delay that fight. But they're going to fight. So who are potential allies now for China? It would be Russia, Pakistan, and Iran, plus some smaller countries. So China no longer is looking at Iran as a market. And we are not looking at China as a factory. Things are changing. We have so many Chinese now in Iran, and basically they are going to be employers, they are investing. And we are beginning to, in fact, even today, we don't have one Chinese language institute, private, of course, Chinese language institute in Tehran, and we have hundreds of English language institutes. So it's beginning to change. We are going to see more of Chinese language institute, and we are going to see more Chinese employers, and we are going to send people to China. Already has begun. I guess more than 1,000 people would go to China to study now. So can you hear me? Hello? Kamrava, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. We hear you. Yes, go
okay.
ahead. Yes,
because I cannot see your picture. Yes, I can see now. So I thought it has been discovered. So China now is present here. China is basically, you can find Chinese almost everywhere. So, but there are two groups who are debating. One would say that we have to go get strategically close to China, to be rather in the orbit of China. And the other group would say, no, you have to get close to China, but not to be in the orbit of China. In the poll, the emerging poll against the United States. So these two groups are challenging one another. I don't want to say challenge, they are debating one another. And the point is, the argument of the first group, those who would say that we should go to the orbit of China, is United strategic value of Middle East in general have been reduced for the Americans. It doesn't mean that they're going to leave there, but they are not going to provide, they have been the most important security guarantor or security producer. China so far have been relied on Americans for the security of energy production and energy transit. It's changed. China should do it itself now. China should spend resources, should spend money and energy and allocate resources in order to provide the security for the region. So that's why we see a lot of Chinese basically presence in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, in Jordan, in Lebanon, in all the Persian Gulf countries, so forth and so on. But at the end of the day, China knows that all these countries, to a large extent, are in the orbit of the Americans. And the only country which is not in the orbit of the Americans is Iran. Thus, they understand that. And the issue number two, which is important for them, is Iran has the power we don't have the power to create stability, but we have the power to destabilize the region. They know that we are already, and Bismillah has a lot of, we have a lot of influence in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, in Afghanistan, in Lebanon. And they know that it is important that they have enough influence in Iran that persuade Iran to stabilize the region and not to destabilize it. So Iran's significance for China is increasing as time passes. Thus, we can conclude that the first group who think that we have to get closer to China has a strong hand in Iran to say that, okay, we need to get closer to them. But the other group, the other alternative group would say that, no, we just cannot get closer to China because of a number of reasons. We have to get closer to China, but not to go to the orbit of China because of a number of reasons. First of all, we are a revolutionary country. Our slogan have been neither East, neither West. How possibly we can get that close to China? So the Iranian society is very much Western-oriented society. And as I said, that we have hundreds of English language institutes, but we don't have even one private Chinese language institute in Tehran. Thus, the society would not allow that to happen too. And also, that would be stupid of us just to put all of our basket in one. We have to balance our interest with the West and with the Chinese too. Thus, that's a debate now. My prediction would be that the first group cannot win the argument. In other words, we are going to have a closer relationship, far closer relationship with China, but we are not going to be in the orbit of China. That's my prediction. And then my last word about Europe. Unfortunately, what President Trump clearly showed to the world is United States is the only global power. All the other powers are basically regional power. Russia, Europe, China. And, President Trump clearly showed that United States by itself can impose its will to the world. It asked in fact, even the permanent member of the Security Council to violate 2231, the UN Security Council resolution. What America was demanding is just violate it, and they did in practice. Of course, not in words, but in practice they did. So that showed to us that Europe, unfortunately, is almost irrelevant to our strategic calculus. So the post-Trump era would be important for us because of a number of reasons that would show us how close we should get to China, how close should we get to Europe, and what can we expect from Europe, what can we expect from the America, and what can we expect from the Russians if we go according to realism and think international politics is the politics of great powers. And these are the four great powers. But before finishing my talk, Mehran Jan, if you permit me to discuss a little bit about our neighborhood too. Iran certainly would prefer, as it has already indicated, Iran would prefer a sort of a security arrangement for our country with the exclusion of all extra regional players. If we are thinking about the Persian Gulf, Iran is ready, has already proposed, and we are ready to give concession, in fact, in that regard too, as a bigger country of the region. But my understanding is that's almost impossible. No matter what we say, smaller countries of the Persian Gulf are going to be worried from us and Saudis now, Iraq maybe later. In order to address that issue, I guess we need some extra regional players. And the only country which majority of these countries are going to trust, smaller countries, is going to be America. It's not going to be Russia, it's not going to be Turkey, it's not going to be Egypt. So they don't think they have enough power to stand against us, or in case Saudi Arabia. So that's why I think realistically the presence of the United States in any sort of security arrangement for the region is a necessity. But also then Iran would feel that would be against Iran if only United States is there. So thus Iran may feel more comfortable if the Russians are there too. Thus, I think if we are going to have a security arrangement and a structure for the region, for the Persian Gulf, then these two countries should be included in that one. That's more doable and more possible. Of course, that's at the formal level, but at the informal level, as I said, China, in fact, is going to be the most important player in next 10, 20 years for the security, for providing the security in the region. So we are not going to see China as a part of a formal process, but informally they are going to try to stabilize the region and to be a security producer, particularly with the relationship with Iran. So that's the way I would see the region. And I don't go to our east, I don't go to our north. For instance, Pakistan is the far more important security issue for us than the others. But since I guess our talk is going to be related mostly to our west, I don't address the issue of the Pakistan and the Azerbaijan and the others now, but in case in the question and answer, there is a question, I will be more than glad to address them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nasser, for a very comprehensive and thorough discussion and picture of the regional environment and Iran's possible options as we move forward. Thank you so much. That was excellent. We have a number of questions, both in relation to your talk and questions that have come up. You did address a question about the differences between Biden and Trump, but there was because of time limitations, the question of Syria didn't come up. You alluded to this somewhat indirectly, but will President-elect Biden choose a different policy than Trump in relation to Syria? And if so, how will that impact Iran's position and relationship with Syria?
Thank you. I guess, as soon as we have the JCPOA, I guess within next 10 months, we are going to deal with the regional issue. First with Yemen, which is a low-hanging fruit, and it's not a part of our security complex. Thus, it's far easier for us to give concession on Yemen. So we are going to deal with it, I can say, in fact, right away. Then we are going to address Iraq and Afghanistan, because our interests with the Americans are very close. We don't have that much dispute about Afghanistan and about Yemen. I'm sorry, Iraq. Syria is far more complex because Russians are very key player there. And our presence in Syria basically is due to what we call in Tehran creating an effective deterrence against Israelis. So when we rank our threat perception, threat number one is United States, then Israel, then chaos in the region, including terrorism. Fourth is world order, and very distant fifth in last 4 years have been Saudi Arabia. So on the basis of this threat perception, our strategic depth is Syria and Lebanon. So strategic depth is going to come from a threat perception. So by its very nature is a very defensive posture, as Pentagon has indicated too. So our concern in Syria is predominantly a security issue, but economy, reconstruction, military presence, strategic ports, so forth and so on, they are all secondary. They are far more important for the Russians. But Russians have to deal with both Israelis and Iranians, and they have to create a balance. They are communicating our red lines to one another, and the attack of the Israelis to our sides basically is they understand that we are basically completing the belt. So that's why they want to interrupt that belt to the extent possible. But I guess we are almost there. And Americans, to a large extent, I guess, would look at the Syria to a large extent through Israeli lens. They want to prevent Iran from basically establishing and creating and completing that belt. But at the end of the day, it is far more difficult to deal with even the Biden administration about the Syria. It would take time, it would take energy, because other issues on it are involved. So basically, that's an Israeli issue, let's put it that way. For us, our presence in Syria and in Lebanon, to a large extent, is about Israel. And America and Israel has a lot of power in America. And Americans' presence and concerns, to a large extent, again, is Israel. So unless somehow we find a way to address the Israeli issue, I guess addressing Syrian issue would be very difficult, very difficult. So my understanding would be Biden administration would be reluctant, no matter how much pressure, would be reluctant to leave Syria altogether. Although Russians may apply pressure for that basically American presence to be far limited in terms of number and in terms of function they are performing. So that's one way. Of course, there are alternative ways they make it closed. They make it close to Assad again. There may be a deal between Israelis and Assad about the Golan Heights, so forth and so on, which exclude Iran. But these are far-reaching. But I don't rule that out. I mean, those things can happen too. But in terms of present trajectory, I doubt it's going to happen.
Thank you. Nasser, we have a number of questions. So if I could ask you to make your answers slightly more concise. I appreciate the deep analysis, believe me, and this is excellent. Okay. Speaking of Israel and Syria, there's a question about whether or not you think if Biden were to return to the JCPOA unconditionally, would that, or if he were to signal that he were to return, would that then prompt Israel to launch a preemptive attack on Iran, with Saudi complicity or overflight, at least overflight agreement?
Mehran, the only country who can attack Iran is US. Not British, not French, not Israeli, no one else. We have been able to create deterrence against all of them. So the only country who has the capability to do it is America. So Israelis by themselves, no matter what they say, they have to fly because that's the dictate of geography. They have to fly more than 1,000 kilometers to reach us. They are right next, we are right next to them. So they are not stupid. I mean, in case, even if they are successful to have the refueling, to have the passage from Saudi Arabia, to come in fact to Iran, because our nuclear infrastructure is very much dispersed throughout the country. It's impossible that through one attack, they can wipe them out. Okay, that's impossible. But we are just next to them, almost from everywhere. And they understand that. So we have been able to just look at the Israelis, the way they are dealing with the Hezbollah now in Lebanon, and consider that about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So why they think twice before taking action? Because they know there is a cost. There is a cost. So that's why we are not worried, to be frank with you, at all about Israelis. Israelis attack themselves. Just it is only America. And in fact, the reason we are there is to create deterrence not only against the Israelis, but against the Americans. You know, because we know we cannot do that with the American. We cannot create deterrence against American themselves, because either they are ships, which would be extremely difficult to do anything with the ships, or if they are within the bases, that the bases are well protected. Of course, that would different in Iraq and in Afghanistan. So we have resources to deal with them in those places, but we don't have the resources, or that's what I think. We don't have the resources to deal with them in the ships. So that's why we have to create the deterrence against Israel in order to create a deterrence against the Americans. Because if Americans know that they're going to take something, we are going to respond in Israel, not with the Americans necessarily directly.
Perfect. Thank you. I have a question regarding the next presidential elections in Iran. These elections are coming up in the summer, and you alluded to them. Can you briefly just say a couple of things about the role and importance of these elections, please?
Thank you very much. I guess, the principalists, which are made up of three groups: conservatives, JCPOA, or what we call hardliners or radicals or whatever you want to call them. And then we have the Wind Party, Hezbollah. Okay. The Wind Party is basically Ghalibaf, Mohsen Rezai, and this type. Conservatives are Ali Larijani type, very clerical conservative. And the Paidari, or the radical one, are those people who have been pro-Ahmadinejad before. So these are the three groups. And the moderates and the pro-change group are group two, reformist and pragmatist, of Rouhani, Rafsanjani type, and we have the Khatami and Mousavi type on this side. So they are jogging for the election. There may be a chance, of course, personally, I don't think Ghalibaf is going to run. So Jalili, or the Zarqami, I mean, there are a number of people from the other sides. You have seen the list of 10, 12 people from the other side. And from this side also, they are still debating whether they should participate or not. Because if the argument of the reformists is that, I mean, if they disqualify our people, we are not going to participate. But I guess in a final analysis, at the end of the day, what I think is, from this side, one individual, most probably Zarif. Not that Zarif is the strongest candidate among the reformists, but he's the most electable. Okay, he's the most electable candidate from this side. So Zarif, I guess, has a good chance to be candidate. Of course, there are a number of others, but I'm seeing it down the road. Although he has repeatedly said that he's not going to run, but I guess who knows what would happen several months from now. And of course, this is provided that we have the JCPOA. The American go back to JCPOA. If America do not go back to the JCPOA, I don't think Zarif is going to run. And from the other side, most probably it is going to be Zarqami or Jalili. Although Ghalibaf has the best chance, but since he's already the head of a branch of government, I'm not sure he's going to leave. But I will not be surprised to see even he run. But I guess it's going to be one of these two. Raisi is not going to run too, although Raisi ran before. But I guess since there are two heads of branches of government, I don't see any reason why they have to quit. So that's the way I would see. If we have a successful JCPOA, Zarif has an excellent chance of winning the election. Okay.
Nasser, there's a couple of questions that will be asked of you in Arabic. If you could please, on the bottom of the screen, if you could put the flag on English, and this you would hear the translation. I will ask our translators to go ahead and ask the question when ready.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
I'm ready.
Dr. Ahmad, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Dr. Mehran. I would like to thank Dr. Nasser for this holistic view as far as the reaction of Iran to the future propensities of Biden administration. However, in the yesteryears, at the time of Donald Trump's era, I think some of the officials around Biden will assess the previous era, and perhaps they will have different outcomes, totally different from Dr. Nasser's talk about deterrence, especially when Iran has the Revolutionary Guard. However, it cannot and could not defend Qasem Soleimani, the head of the IRCG. There's also a nuclear dossier that Iran is trying to develop, but it couldn't also protect its scholars. There is also the ballistic missile program that Iran resorts to, and there are targets in Saudi Arabia, targets in the Gulf. However, unfortunately, this program had downed the Ukrainian aircraft. Do you think, Dr. Hadian, do you think it is high time just to think outside the box rather than talk about the issue from the classical perspective as far as the balance of power is concerned? Yes, I do understand that there is a great deal of plausibility of what you've said, but perhaps we need to think deeply as far as the military capacities are concerned, as well as the Iranian interventions in Syria, Yemen, and other countries. Iran is outstretched now. Iran is exhausted now, and if we talk about the Iran's internal affairs, I think there are also problems, especially as far as the civil society is concerned. The Iranians have been burdened with the crippling economic sanctions. Do you think that it is high time to have a different paradigm, a different approach in order to emphasize the deterrence in Iran internally and externally, and perhaps to extend bridges so that these files that are security related can be dealt with once and for all, especially the military interference in the region, so that we can get to a real stability, because Iran, at the end of the day, is a neighbor. to the Arab countries, and there is a genuine interest for interdependence with the Arab states. So perhaps these kind of interventions and these kind of dialogues ought to be perhaps based on a structure that relates to the international relations, so that we can perhaps have different paradigms and different approaches as far as Iran is concerned. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr.
Can I answer now?
Go ahead, please, Nasser.
Okay. Thanks a lot for the question. As I mentioned, when we rank our threat perception, as I said, that the very distant fifth is Saudi Arabia. We don't perceive Saudi Arabia, UAE, and the others as an enemy. Thus, that's why we have proposed the Hope proposal. That's why we have sent Zarif. Repeatedly, I've said we are ready for any negotiation. We are ready, in fact, even to give concession. We are ready to give concession and to help, for instance, to stabilize the Yemen and with the Saudis. So the point is not us, but we are number one threat. If you rank the threat perception in the Saudi Arabia, Iran is number one threat. So that disparity of threat perception is extremely important. So, and when you think why that's the case, to me, it's because, to be frank with you, it is because Saudi Arabia and some of the other countries, some of the other countries have outsourced the security to the Americans. So that's why when we have a good relationship, when we had a good relationship with Obama, or we are going to have a good relationship with Biden, they are scared. Why? Because they think that America is going to sell them and go for us. Of course, that's not the case, and we don't want that. Why that's the case? To me, as I said a few days ago to another friend of mine, Saudi friend of mine, I said that you can balance us. You have the population, you have the resources, you have far more sophisticated weaponry than we have. You have financial resources that we don't have. You have a backing of a superpower and some other great powers. So you can easily balance us. Why you want someone else to provide the security for us and to charge you and to humiliate you? And saying to MBS that, Trump explicitly saying that, okay, without us, you cannot survive 2 weeks. So that's, they are saying, but for us, we are ready for any sort of rapprochement because we don't see you as a threat. We don't see you as an enemy. So that's a consensus in Iran. It is not a hardliner or softliner. It's not a principalist or reformist. Everyone agrees that we need to get close to our neighbors. Our neighbors are neighbors forever. It's not America. It's not Russia. It's not somebody that some distance power. So for us, we are ready for any sort of closer relationship. But my point is that you have to find this confidence in yourselves that can balance. You just look at Saddam. Saddam population was less than you all. But Saddam could balance Iran. So you can do the same thing. But the point is Saddam relied on its own resources. You can do the same thing. But once you balance yourself, once you rely on your resources, believe me, you find a partner this side. We are ready for that one. And our presence, as I mentioned, in Syria and Lebanon is to a large extent about Israel. It's not about you. But no matter what we say, you perceive it is because of you. So you need, as I said, you need to study our threat perception. It's good to see that we don't perceive you as a threat. We don't perceive you as an enemy. But that's exactly the opposite from the other side. So that's why there's a threat perception. There is a disparity of threat perception that need to be changed. And also, as I mentioned, if you rely on your resources, believe me, you can balance us easily. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to combine two questions, and then there's an excellent question about the extent of Iran-US relations. I will ask that at the end because it's such an excellent question. But let me just ask you, first and foremost, can you say a couple of words about Iran's relationship with India? Is that a question of balance of power? And in particular, insofar as China is concerned, Iran's relationship with India. And then would you describe Iranian security policy as defensive or offensive? Those are two questions that have come our way.
Thank you, Kamran. Regarding India, it's a very interesting one. Of course, India, as long as it was the leader of non-aligned movement, of course, Iran was very close to it. But once it changed, so our relationship is very, I can say, is much more nuanced now. But at the end of the day, as I mentioned, Chabahar is a crystal clear example of what's happening between China, India, Iran. So because, you know, China has built a port in Gwadar, Pakistan. But India also, because it's an Indian Ocean. So India wants to be the greatest naval power in the Indian Ocean. Thus, for them, it was important to have the Chabahar, to have a port in Chabahar, to have a base, in the Chabahar. And so that's why they approached us for a deal there. We knew that too. So that's why I said you see China's place here too. China also wanted that too. Although they were in Gwadar, so economically that was stupid of them to want to be in Chabahar. But still, out of the competition with India, they wanted to be part of the Chabahar too. Although we proposed, we would have preferred a European consortium, okay, of, for instance, Italy, Russia, and Japan to develop the Chabahar port. But because of the sanctions or whatever, it didn't happen. Thus, we have to give a portion to both of them. Although India, just imagine, out of everything that America was not ready to give waiver, America gave waiver to India about the Chabahar. That was very interesting, you know. But still, they could not develop. And at the end of the day, a few months back, a year back, we basically took the contract back from the India. To me, that's an indication that we are getting closer to China. Although we would like to have still a good relationship with India, but certainly we have chosen the more significant and important partner, which is going to be China. But regarding the next question, that I mean, if it is our defensive, I guess you know, there are three views here. I would say myself too. One view is Iran is projecting power. Iran, by its very nature, and interestingly, some of the radical monarchists and some of the radical Islamists have the same view regarding the projection of power. They think Iran, by its very nature, history, civilization, is strong. And that power should be extended all the way to the Mediterranean. Okay, that's one view. The alternative view is, no, it's a defensive. We need to create a deterrence. A deterrence by its very nature is very, very, very defensive. And that's the conclusion of the Pentagon as well. Of course, the third view is, no, forget about projecting or projecting power, or creating deterrence. We have to deal only with our neighbors, at least for the foreseeable future, for the next 20 years. But the dominant view, Kamran, is deterrence, is defensive. That's a dominant view. And if you ask me, I would say it's more defensive. No, it's defensive. It has a lot of policy implication. I've already said it to the Americans, that if you want all policy to be changed, change your rhetorics and change your behavior regarding regime change, so forth and so on. If you change that one, it's going to have an impact inside Iran if you assume that Iran is there because of creation of effective deterrence.
Perfect. Thank you, Nasser. I appreciate it. I have a question. You mentioned that Iran impressed upon President Obama, particularly towards the end of his term, that it would have to come, that the Obama administration would have to come to some sort of modus vivendi with Iran, because the options were either war or bomb, and that this is what Iran has tried to do again. Now, we all know that there's a famous fatwa by Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader, that says Iran does not want a bomb. If Ayatollah Khamenei passes away, does that fatwa go away? And does that fatwa go away? I think you froze. Maybe I think we've lost you on the internet. I think that's an important question to ponder, whether or not that fatwa would be picked up by the next supreme leader versus the next supreme leader. And I think for our audience, the other question that might be important to ponder is the question of GCC involvement in the next round of the negotiations between the United States and Iran. As we know, the countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council would like to be involved in the negotiations, but Iran has so far steadfastly refused that. And I would be interested in hearing Nasser's views on that. But unfortunately, we've lost him. We're going to see if we can reestablish the connection. I was quite keen on asking him. I think
Hello.
Coming back. You're back, Nasser. Okay. Yes.
Yes. I got your question, Kamran.
I don't know if you heard my question. The question was
yes.
whether or not the supreme leader's fatwa about about a ban on nuclear weapons goes away when the supreme leader departs from the scene.
Yes. Hello.
Yes. Go ahead. We hear you.
Okay. Yes. Maybe certainly. Basically, the fatwa is going to remain there. It was there before. It is based on Islamic principle, which would say that any weapons that does not distinguish between combatant and civilian is haram, is forbidden. So that's a principle. Okay, so thus any marja issuing a fatwa, it's going to remain there. But that's it. I mean, if you ask me why we don't have a bomb now in Iran, to be frank, his fatwa is far more important than Majlis law or the other things, because those who are in this business are his follower, and they don't care about the law of the land. What they care is what he says. Of course, that's not my view, but that's the view of many of the people like Fakhrizadeh. Okay, for them, what is important is his views, is what he says. But anyway, that's for us inside Iran. The real point is the other side perceive for them fatwa is meaningless. They don't care about the fatwa. They say that you have a taqiyya and you can change it. You have already changed it, so you can basically change the principles easily to fit your interest. Of course, to a large extent, that's true too for everywhere, not just for us. I mean, we normally try to bend the rules the way fit our interest. But these are irrelevant. The relevant point is West perceive Iran is making a bomb. Okay, and they act on the basis of their perception. They don't act on the basis of a fatwa or a law. Just imagine that, okay, we have a law of the Majlis. Do you think that would impact their thinking? No, because they would bring all sorts of issues. They bring all sorts of evidences to say that, okay, that has been the law before and they have changed it now. So they are not going to believe us no matter what. I don't want to argue with them. And my point is they act on the basis of their own perception, their own intelligence. And as soon as we expel them from Iran, there is no monitoring, there is no inspectors, there is no camera, then they are going to say that, okay, they are making a bomb. They perceive that we are making a bomb. Okay, so, and they would act on the basis of their perception. And that's what we call constructive ambiguity. That's what I've called constructive ambiguity. But legally speaking, the fatwa is there. Although, as I said, because it is deriving from the principle of Islam. But although, so the next Wali Faqih, the next Marja, he can change it. Okay, he can come up and change it. Just give you an example of the current debate about the election of military people. Okay, Ayatollah Khomeini explicitly forbidden them to involve in the politics, but they are involving. They change it in a way, and I would say that, okay, the current supreme leader doesn't do it. So of course he didn't say it is haram. Ayatollah Khomeini never said it is haram, but he said, you are not allowed to do it. But of course they are not. I mean, to make a distinction, they are not participating as a military people. They are retired, and they would argue if General Eisenhower could participate, why not us? We are no longer a military people. We are retired, and they would do it. So these are matter of debate. So I can say that, I mean, yes, most probably it's going to remain the case because it is driving from Islamic principle, but that's not enough for the West, I know.
Okay, thank you. Nasser, I saved the best question for last. Before we lose you, I wanted to make sure we ask this question. It's by Barbara Slavin, who's a veteran Iran analyst.
I know.
So Barbara asks the following: how far can the US and Iran go in terms of improving relations, or is a mutual return to the JCPOA the best we can hope for? So I guess we're asking you to look into your crystal ball and tell us how far the US and Iran can go.
Barbara, salam. I hope you are doing well. Barbara, you know my views, but I would repeat them. To me, believe me, if President Obama would have stayed in power, by now we have addressed a number of important issues between us. His approach was excellent approach. He had a good understanding of Iranian politics, and he was right. But unfortunately, he was no longer in power, and we had the President Trump. But now, again, I'm very hopeful about President Biden himself. That's what I had an interview 2 weeks ago, which created a lot of debate inside Iran. And in there, I said, Biden is an opportunity. Barbara, that's exactly what I said. I said, Biden is an opportunity, not Kamala Harris. Kamala still is inexperienced, and he can be influenced by the lobbyists. But Biden is expert. Biden has experience. So that's what I've argued inside Iran. We have to address, we have to begin with the JCPOA. We have to begin unconditionally with the JCPOA, but we have to act very quickly, addressing other issues. First, Yemen, then Iraq and Afghanistan, and then going to other issues in the region. Missiles is extremely difficult, and because that's a part of conventional weapons negotiation. And if there is a principle in such a kind of a negotiation, arms control negotiation, the principle is basically the balances of forces should not change. What's the difference between a missile and an airplane? According to Israeli father of their missile program, no difference. They're the same. You just cannot single out a missile and say that, okay, we have to concentrate on missiles and not airplanes. The others have far more sophisticated, and that's the only weapons we have. So we're not going to get rid of it, no matter what the West says, unless it's a part of a larger issue. All the weapons are on the table, not just one. Or we have to have other things too, and the others should cut the range, and then you can talk about it. So that's of course, I would argue in principle, let's negotiate, but we can present a point in the negotiation. But there are people who would say that no negotiation on the missiles. That's a defensive. That's what we have. So why should we get rid of such a kind of a defensive weapons? So, but Babar, in general, I'm hopeful. I think it's not going to be limited to the JCPOA, provided, I'm saying again and again and again, provided everyone go back to the JCPOA very quickly. We solve that issue within 100 days of President Biden in power. Then, to me, that would change the balance of power inside Iran too. Then the reformers are going to have a good chance. And then we are going to go to address the other three issues which I mentioned: Yemen, Iraq, and Afghanistan. So hopefully in the future, before both of us leave this world, we are going to see a much better relationship here.
Thank you, Nasser.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Be well.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Nasser. I have one last question, and I'm going to ask it before a large audience of witnesses. Will you please come back and share with us your insights in a year or two once the Biden administration has settled into office and gotten going?
Certainly, I will be glad to, Mehran. You have your what we call your status toward me is status of not asking but ordering. You just order, I will be there.
You're very kind.
مقام شما مقام سیدی فارسی, your مقام is a مقام امر, not مقام سوال.
I'm deeply honored. My professor. Thank you so very much. Please allow me to take this opportunity.
You're welcome.
To thank Professor Nasser Hadian, as well as our audiences worldwide. This has been an absolutely enriching experience for me, and I'm sure for everyone else. Our collective thanks to you, Nasser, and my thanks to everyone, but also my apologies to those whose questions I couldn't take. We will be happy to share those questions with Professor Hadian privately, and then we can get back to you. Thank you again, and have a pleasant day from here in Doha. Bye-bye.
خوشحال شدم. خداحافظت باشه کامران جان.